It looks like the room is pretty full, so we will get started. Um, my name is Rabbi Alana Baden, for those whom I haven't met yet. I hope to be able to meet you someday soon. I am the newer rabbi at Temple Sinai, and it is a pleasure to be hosting this program along with Congregation Ner Tamid. And I want to thank Rabbi Axelrod for reaching out and suggesting that we host this Zoom series with Dr. Windmueller. Is Rabbi Axelrod on yet?
Not yet.
Okay, when he is, I want to give an opportunity for him to say hello to everybody. Um, we um, we want to thank Shauna Brody for helping with the technology and the PowerPoint this evening, and also for being our master of ceremonies with the question and answer. A reminder that you can use the chat to pose questions or to let us know. And then also after Dr. Windmueller presents, we'll have an opportunity for people to either raise their digital hand or their physical hand, and Shauna will tell us more about that. I also want to thank Leslie Snodowski for helping to arrange all of this as well. So, Dr. Stephen Windmueller, just a show of hands, how many people were on the call last Wednesday? Okay, a number of us. The way that this series works is that you can come to both or just one or the other. They're all self-contained. But Rabbi Axel and Rod and I started talking about this series weeks ago, if not months ago, before the world changed, and decided that it would be very interesting to hear from Dr. Windmueller on Israel-diaspora relations and also about 21st century American Judaism. And of course, these topics are still very pressing, but even more so now with the current situation. And there's really nobody better to talk about these topics with than Dr. Windmueller. So as we know, Dr. Stephen Windmueller is a well-respected author, journalist, and lecturer. He is the Emeritus Professor of Jewish Communal Studies at the Jack H. Skirball campus of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in LA. He served for 10 years as the director of HUCJIR's School of Jewish Nonprofit Management, and in 2005 was named to the deanship of the LA campus. In 2009, he was named to an endowed chair, and in 2014, he was awarded with an honorary doctorate by the college. He has authored 4 books and numerous articles, some that we sent to you as links that I hope you were able to read. Dr. Windmueller holds a PhD in International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania, and his articles have appeared in several secular and Jewish publications. Currently, he is consulting with national agencies, federations, synagogues, and foundations in connection with his current studies on virtual and privatized Judaism, the impact of COVID, and the broader social, economic, and political trends reshaping American Jewish life. He is a busy man. And tonight, Dr. Windmueller will talk about the key factors that are contributing and influencing an ever-changing Jewish landscape in this country and what it might mean for our institutions, political engagement, philanthropy, and especially in light of what's going on in Israel. And we all know too well the heightened anti-Semitism that many of us, and especially our college kids, are experiencing today. So if Rabbi Axelrod is on, I want to give him one more chance. Otherwise, we'll let him say something at the end. I think he'll
At
get
the
one of the
end.
last words. And now, without any further ado, Dr. Windmueller, thank you so much for spending this evening with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Baden, and to both congregations, my appreciation for the invitation to join you. And indeed, as the rabbi just noted, we are certainly pivoting in the moment where we are reconsidering some of the issues that we had initially planned to speak about in the context of the events surrounding the Gaza-Israel crisis. So, Shauna, why don't we bring up the PowerPoint and let us begin our conversation. In many ways, your congregations and those of the literally thousands of Jewish synagogues and temples across the United States are living with and facing significant challenges as part of what I have described as 21st century American Judaism. But the challenges over the past 3 weeks have fundamentally reshaped and are reshaping what may be the future roles of not only congregations, but of our federations, our national agencies, and even our Jewish community foundations. So let's move to the next slide. Indeed, two of Rabbi Baden's colleagues, Rabbis Joshua Stanton and Rabbi Benjamin Spratt, in 2022 authored one of the several books about what we were beginning to see with 21st century American Judaism. In their book, Awakenings, they speak about what they call the fracture and fragmentation that is taking place amongst American Jews and the Jewish communal system. But they also speak to the new Jewish awakening, which in their sense is a sort of a linkage between the role of technology, the place of community, and the possibilities of religion impacting and changing our lives. And regardless of what has happened and will happen in the Middle East, I believe that the focus here on this Jewish awakening may be as profound as any moment in the American Jewish experience. Let's move to our next slide. In so many ways, this is a generational issue. And what sociologists are telling us, that clearly millennials and Gen Zs approach religion and certainly American Judaism in a very different context. They come to it as really outsiders. Their sense of participation, community, and engagement is very different from any prior generations in the American Jewish experience. And the second reality about these two generations is that they are the largest in American history. And they represent for the Jewish community an extraordinary opportunity in terms of how do we connect with these distinctive generations in a changing kind of religious economy or religious culture. Let's move to the next slide. No question about the importance and centrality of individualism in the 21st century. And certainly the rise of the sovereign self speaks to this point. All of that principle, that is the first 23 years of this century, have really focused on how do we respond to this attention to the individual and to the sort of focal points of how individuals are driving the market rather than institutions. But here we are in November 2023 with events surrounding us that may ultimately reshape this idea, where the individual is consumed by the larger pressures of anti-Semitism, of the need to be part of community, of the sense of loneliness and isolation that may rapidly and fundamentally change this equation. Let's move to the next slide. What we have noticed over the past 50 years is a growing decline of loyalty, institutional connections that historically bound generations and individuals to synagogues and communities. And what we have seen is that the past is no longer going to hold this kind of opportunity or obligation of loyalty as people begin to shift in search of the kinds of communities they want and the ways by which they want to create or self-create these alternative forms of community. And here again, in light of these events, we may see some readjustment of this principle of the end of loyalty. Let's move on. All of us have certainly confronted this moment where we have seen the end of civility and certainly the loss of trust and the sense that we are far more isolated, even in community, than we have ever been. Political scientists, beginning in the 1970s, began to study the issue of trust in government or with government, trust in relationship to business, civic affairs, religion, education, and culture, and have seen a fundamental decline, a loss of belief on the part of citizens in many of the core institutions of our society, which has led to disconnection, questioning, doubts about the capacity of leaders to lead and of institutions to serve. So this becomes a critical issue in a time when people are in search of something larger than themselves and in need of reforming or recreating community at a moment where there is such deep division and certainly a sense of isolation. The next slide, please. We have seen over the past 30 years a series of sociological behaviors that we think define what is happening in American religion. We have the dwellers, folks who remain in place, who belong to synagogues, who are loyal to and committed to the institutions they are part of. But we have a huge number of seekers, folks who are in search of community, whether it's a formal institutional connection, such as organized religious life in America, or more of an informal framework of becoming part of something called community. And then we have switchers, folks basically 18 to 35 who have indicated to sociologists that they have changed religion. Now, that could be a change from being a conservative or Orthodox Jew to becoming a Reformed Jew. It could be a change outside of Judaism, meaning someone born Jewish moving out of Judaism. Part of that is explained by the rise of Jewbus, Jews who practice Buddhism, or other forms of religious and cultural expressions that today are part of what switchers are looking for. And finally, what we have noticed with young Americans ages 18 to 35, that 1/3 of all young Americans in that age cohort describe themselves as religious nuns, none of the above. This is the first generational experience we have. It goes back to our millennial and Gen Z conversation, pointing to this distinctive phase of 1/3 of Americans basically saying, I am not identifying with or part of the religious communities of this country. So what we are beginning to see is that we have many categories of both those who are seeking religion, dwelling within it, switching around amongst religions, or having none of the experiences associated with organized religious life. We also have begun to see a kind of multiple American Judaism, or multiple Judaisms, as some have referenced, where people are experimenting with different ways of engaging with, practicing, and participating, which is certainly part of what we expected from the Jewish revolution of the younger millennials and Gen Z constituencies. So this slide clearly defines for us the kind of complexities of what religion in America looks like in the 21st century. The next slide, please. Certainly, what we now know and what we have seen for the past 5 to 7 years is the dramatic growth of social media and the revolution that it has created in terms of creating alternative ways of delivery of information and ideas, but also of religious ideas, religious affiliation, and religious participation. So in the context of what all of this may mean is that we have seen a shift from traditional modalities of communication, coming to a synagogue in person, or being involved in more traditional media relationships, American television and radio, all giving way to the opportunities of social media, of Facebook, of Twitter, and of all the different accounts by which one can participate as an alternative way of gaining information, participating in community, and understanding the character and nature of religious ideas and expressions. What we think is happening in this context is the explosion of two forms of religious behavior, which we will be talking about in future slides: privatized Judaism and virtual Judaism. So let's move forward. One of the realities that we have seen in 21st century American Jewish life is that two events, the 2008 economic recession and the 2020 pandemic really have altered and upended pieces of the organized Jewish communal experience. People moving to social media, people leaving institutions for financial or other reasons, seeing a fundamental recasting of how these institutions are operating in a changing economy and changing society. Part of this is much larger than this question. We see a distinctive decline of the American middle class. And the effect of that on American Jews is to create economic challenges of the affordability of synagogue, the price of membership, the question of being part of community because of its economic implications. The second agenda here is the extraordinary growth of people indicating to us during the pandemic, especially their sense of loneliness, their concerns about their mental well-being, and this core ingredient of feeling very isolated. We have also seen in 4 metropolitan areas an outmigration of significant numbers of middle-class Jewish constituencies. We have seen this in the Bay Area, in metropolitan New York, in Greater Chicago, and here in Southern California. This outmigration has led to the redistribution of populations, moving to Arizona and Nevada, to Texas, to Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana. What we have also seen is the redefinition of work and the notion that one does not necessarily need to be in the workspace. The possibilities with technology and the redefinition of work, allowing people to live anywhere and yet work in core institutions that are still housed in central metropolitan areas of the United States. These revolutions, the decline of the middle class, the issues associated with loneliness, the impact of the outmigration, and the redefinition of work have a profound effect on the welfare, well-being of many synagogues. We have seen the downsizing of churches in America. In 2019, we could identify the closure of 5,000 churches in the United States. And the National Council of Churches tells us that in this decade alone, 25,000 churches will close their doors. But we are seeing some similar patterns in terms of American synagogue life, the mergers of synagogues, in some cases, the downsizing of particular programs or institutional practices of synagogues, and in some instances, the actual closures of America's historic and important synagogue communities. Let's move to the next slide. I think in many ways, what we are seeing has to be put in context. We are a legacy community where most of the institutions of American Jewish life were created between 1875 or 1880 and 1920. The denominational systems, our federation movements, our national and community-based agencies, all were born in that 40-year period due to the rise of the immigration patterns into the United States. We then developed a second sort of revolution of institutional growth, the boutique period, which I have called the Second American Jewish Revolution. I date that from 1985 forward, where I have identified and seen the evolution and development of 600 new Jewish organizations. You know them, you are part of them, and you certainly can identify with many of them. These are institutions that generally have single-issue constituencies. That is, there is a concern for the environment, a concern having to do with being a Republican or a Democrat, a concern having to do with matters related to feeding the hungry, or issues associated with social justice. In all of these and multiple other cases, these boutique institutions have emerged both online and in person to create a response to very particularized needs and desires of American Jews moving from 1985 forward. Some of these groups have come and gone already. That is, they have been closed, merged, or downsized. Others have become part of the larger legacy institutions of which they grew out of. And still others are beginning just to be born or reborn in different contexts. So this is a new market within the Jewish community that's both exciting, challenging, and reflective of the idea of choice, where people are beginning and have begun to select ways by which they want to be Jewish and how they want that story to be told. Let's move to the next slide. I think what community will mean for us in the future will be probably different. Although in light of the events of the past several weeks, it is difficult to say that we could project a pattern that is specific to this model or case. We believed up until October 7th that what we were seeing was the sort of creation of alternative forms of community, privatized Judaism, where individual Jews were making choices about things on social media that interested them, that allowed them to practice, participate, and become part of something that was tied to a particular cause or practice that they were interested in. Virtual Judaism, that was the experience by which many synagogues were able to bring to their communities and members alternative ways of participating online as a way to be part of community in a virtual context. Some of our synagogues were extraordinarily successful in that venture. We have data today to suggest that, for example, in the year 2022, on Yom Kippur, Central Synagogue in New York, Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, B'nai Jeshurun in New York, Temple Israel of Detroit, Ikar in Los Angeles, and hosts of other institutions were reporting to us that they had extraordinarily large numbers of viewers in a kind of virtual membership model or a virtual participatory model that was distinctively different from the notion of simply serving existing members. So what we began to think about was the rise of the National Virtual Synagogue. Central Synagogue shared with us that on Yom Kippur of 2022, they estimated some 600,000 hits, literally through Twitter, Facebook, and all of the other accounts by which individuals could participate in Central Synagogue's ability to provide virtual worship, allowed them to be able to serve huge numbers of new constituencies. The challenge and threat here, does that mean the end of some synagogues in local and smaller communities? What does the idea of membership mean if you have a virtual kind of affiliation pattern? So this becomes a challenging question. And whether the events of the last several weeks will change some of this or will accelerate this remains unclear. We have two other forms of Judaisms that we have begun to study. Entrepreneurial Judaism, the idea of an ability of an entrepreneur to create, build, fund, and support alternative ways of participating and practicing in Jewish life. Some of the models that we have studied from 1985 moving forward reflect that. And what we have also begun to identify is a vast amount of interest by young American Jews in what we are calling nostalgia Judaism. They are interested in Jewish foods. They are returning to old Jewish films and cultural experiences. They are discovering books. They are interpreting and examining new and old languages, whether Yiddish or Ladino or other experiences with Jewish language has all been reborn or is being recycled in this moment in which nostalgic Judaism plays a role. So we have new definitions and new experiences about which we will need to study. The next slide, please. Certainly the 21st century American Jewish experience is fundamentally different than at any earlier moment in the American experience. Jews of color, LGBTQ communities, ethnic Jewish constituencies of Jews from Russia, Iran, the former from Ethiopia and Latin America, among others, and Jews by choice. The growth of the intermarried participatory family and the ability and willingness of individuals to select Judaism as their choice of religious practice and behavior. So we are exceedingly excited about the fact that there's a growth modality in the Jewish community and a radical change in the diversities of our community, as reflected in the data we now have about the numbers of folks in these categories who are moving into and becoming part of community. The next slide, please. I think that a number of factors will define the future direction of our society and culture. Certainly, as I've described, economic disruptions and the nature of work will be part of that. Certainly, the issues of how populations move or shift, the status and stakes of the middle class, which are so core to the Jewish community, the cultural wars around trust and sense of security and identity, the political and social divisions that we've seen in our nation and within the Jewish community. And we would add to this in this moment, what will be the impact of anti-Semitism and the new levels of hate directed against Jews in our communities, to our students, and to the society as a whole in terms of its dealing with the implications of this sort of wave of religious hatred directed against Muslims and Jews in particular. How will that play out in reshaping the American synagogue life, American communal and Jewish life, and in rebuilding a sense that people seek community in a time of great social upheaval and change? The next slide, please. I think, as we have said throughout this presentation, the issues before us tonight, dealing with concerns about Israel, threats to Jews, the challenges to our democracy, and the efforts to reclaim trust, are all core to the unanswered questions of where we will be as an American Jewish community, how we will change as a result of not only these issues, but of all the sociological and economic ones we've already laid out this evening. This is an extraordinary moment of uncertainty, but it is also a moment of possibility. And that is what is particularly exciting about studying and examining 21st century American Judaism. The next slide, please. In some way, what I think we were headed toward achieving was what I have called a snowflake model of organizing. We would have begun to see a far less centralized system where federations and community systems of organizing would give way to pods and to bottom-up forms of management and development, where we would see a lot of experimentation, agility, and different forms of expectations, all of which were loosely connected, but clearly divided by particular interest and behavior patterns and personal choice. In this moment, I am uncertain that the snowflake model will be that choice that we will make moving forward. Possibly it will come at a later time, as we in the short term for sure will want to find ways to reintegrate, to reconsolidate community in a moment in which coming together becomes a very powerful motif for Jewish behavior and practice. The next slide, please. So I think in the end, all of this reminds us of things we know about. Indeed, we live in a moment of chaos, and we are forced to manage a good deal of change. There are extraordinary challenges, new ones to our communal system and older ones to our denominational models. And certainly, while we have and will continue to embrace this notion of individualism and experimentation, and as we understand the impact of such things as artificial intelligence and technological innovation, we will also have to consider the underlying issues of whether or not in this moment will Israel reconnect, will force us to reconnect amongst American Jewry as we examine both existing models and explore new ones as part of a 21st century challenge. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the questions, and I'm most appreciative to both of our rabbis and to Shauna for their support and involvement with these two sessions.
Thank you very much. So much to think about. So a couple of things. If you want to ask a question or participate in the conversation, We appreciate it if you would raise your Zoom hand. You can find your Zoom hand down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's either a button that's going to be called Reactions or a button called More with 3 dots at the top, where you can click on that and you'll see reactions. Then choose the raise hand function. It puts you in a queue in the order that you raised your hand and makes it much easier. If all else fails, just go ahead and unmute yourself, and I will hopefully see that. I will call upon you, and then you can ask your questions then. And Rabbi Axelrod, be the first one. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, and thank you again, Steve, for agreeing to be our scholar, and appreciate everyone, Temple Sinai members as well. So just out of selfish curiosity, you know, I've always maintained Chabad is the most successful movement of the 20th century, much to the chagrin of my colleagues, but I think pretty much a lot of them now are on board and their tremendous outreach. But now you mentioned this phenomenon of where Central Synagogue and Ikar and all this have touched people through social media and Zoom and the whole bit. And all of us are trying the same thing. Have you figured out what their secret sauce is? Do they just put more money into production values? Is it that because their congregations are already by definition kind of mega synagogues, so that way those people have relatives who have relatives who have relatives, and it's exponential? Just curious what you think the secret sauce is.
When Ron Wolfson and I wrote the piece for Tablet Magazine on the rise of the virtual national synagogue, and we looked at those models that Rabbi, you're just describing, we saw 3 factors that I think describe why some of these mega congregations were particularly successful. First of all, they are in very large markets. Secondly, they had been in the business of technology and social media performance before COVID, and as a result had an infrastructure and financial capacity to sort of grow their ability to program in such spheres, in multiple spheres, if you wish, because they're not simply expecting from live stream or Facebook, but they have other connections by which they are able to market and deliver their worship services to audiences. So they have a multiplicity of options. The third factor has to do with the reality that when you create a national figure, and in some ways the rabbi of Central Synagogue has become that, it adds a kind of dimension to the curiosity factor for audiences, particularly interested in who she is and her capacity to sort of create a kind of an aura of response to her persona. Something similar at Park Avenue we noticed with the cantor there and his huge following in terms of the kinds of music and the kinds of innovations that he would be bringing to the liturgy at Park Avenue. So what we began to identify was that it was also about the distinctive personalities involved, along with these other factors that both you and I have just referenced.
Did you find it with Steve Leader and Wolpe?
Well, their numbers are strong in the case of Wilshire Boulevard and David Wolpe when he was at Sinai, but not nearly
Right.
the kinds of levels of participation that we seem to find with Central and Park Avenue. Although I have to admit, we did not go deeper with either Wilshire or Sinai at this time. I want to say something about your comment about Chabad. And you may have read this. In August of 2012, I wrote a piece, The 10 Reasons for Chabad's Success. And of all the things I have written on e-Jewish philanthropy or elsewhere, it was the single most read piece I have ever written. So I'm happy to share it with Rabbi Baden and with you to just sort of bring into focus why some of us, including you for sure, Rabbi, who have this strong belief that Chabad has some secret sauce, or at least some elements to their success story, and we need to sort of understand what those are and what areas we could actually emulate and where we are not able to do so.
Thank you. Look forward to reading that. Yeah.
Okay, so again, if you have a question, we prefer you raise your Zoom hand, but you can also just unmute, which places you in a different order, and I'll call out and you can ask a question. Gary Cantor, you just joined not too long ago, so I don't know if you unmuted with a question or you just did not mute when you arrived.
Just arrived.
Okay.
Well, while we're waiting, I'm going to ask another question then. You know, I've seen, I read a lot of David Suissa. I think he's a really good writer, a really thoughtful writer. What has now happened with Gaza and Israel war, I see a great deal of fear among people. And, but with the fear, doesn't mean that they want to hide. It's almost as if they're rediscovering an aspect of their Jewish identity that maybe was submerged. And for some, it's Holocaust syndrome. And for others, it is a reawakening of emotions and feelings that maybe they didn't know they had. And then when it comes to Israel specifically, the vulnerability of Israel perhaps echoes their own sense of vulnerability as a Jew, because there's this belief or fantasy that Israel, this strong country that can do everything, this brave Israelis, well, you know, in our back pocket, we always got someplace to go. We always have, you know, someone who's going to remind us that Jews are strong and we're never going to be led to, you know, to the gas chambers silently again, not going to happen. And this seems to have been attacked at its core. And now Jews are looking to redefine themselves. There's almost, also I read an article about not a desire for the JDL, but a variation of the JDL, you know, which is Jewish Defense League, that Jews need to now somehow develop a national way to defend themselves. So people, that's a reflection of the fear and concern. And I sense it in Las Vegas every day. So however you want to address it.
Yeah, I think that's something very real, and certainly we see it across the country. What I think we also are seeing are three other related phenomena. The single largest development of fundraising in American Jewish history in terms of galvanizing American Jews, exceeding by significant amounts 1967, 1973, and other moments when American Jews were called upon to give huge sums of money. And the second reality of that is that this is the first campaign or campaigns where we have multiple ways by which we give. We historically gave through the federated system. In this war, we have these extraordinary alternative choices of giving in multiple means and multiple ways, which has thereby increased both the volume of giving, but also the numbers of donors. So that's a piece that I thought we should add. The second is the amount of wordage, of poems, of music, of stories that have just in 3.5 weeks emerged to allow Jews to feel emotionally tied to each other and to this story has been extraordinary, and this will continue for sure to grow. And a third factor that I think is particularly powerful here is that we see a number of Jews who are making statements about reconnecting institutionally. For example, day schools are reporting to us in a couple of communities that there are parents moving or wish to move their kids from public schools to day school education, a combination of the concern for security, but also the sense that they want their kids to understand this Jewish journey and this moment in time as having something both historic and essential in their connections to who they are as Jews and why they are Jews. It also raises the other challenging issue for all of us, the lack of knowledge, the total lack of sort of historic context and connection that many folks, Jews and non-Jews alike, in terms of knowing the history of the Middle East, the story of the state of Israel, Jewish experience, both before the founding of the state and since the state, as a way of putting this all into some measured and informative basis of knowledge, because people are devoid of a lot of the context of this story.
Did you find amongst intermarried families anything different? Did they want to hide to the Christian side, or did it actually do the opposite, saying, you know what, we can't do that, but the world defines us as Jews?
I think, Rabbi, it's a bit too early to call that one, to give you a valid response. I can only tell you that Bruce Phillips, who you may know, is my colleague, a sociologist, and has a vast capacity and knowledge of the field of intermarriage and interfaith studies. No doubt we'll look at that question. But in an interesting opportunity I had at Temple Emmanuel of Dallas 2 weeks ago, talking to parents of religious school kids, many of whom were Jews by choice. And the phenomenal point here is that they were very clearly identifying Jewishly, very clearly feeling a sense they wanted to help explain this to their children and to somehow demonstrate to them why it is important to sort of to celebrate or to be connected to the Jewish community at this moment.
Interesting, among my recent Jews by choice, I've always found explaining Israel to someone converting to Judaism is tough. You know, it's how do you explain that? And yet, for some reason, I must have sprinkled the magic dust, because they seem really, really upset, concerned, not saying I made a bad choice. Their non-Jewish relatives are concerned for them, but they're standing strong with Israel. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Roberta Sabbath has a question.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking to us. Can you hear me okay?
I do.
Little louder, Roberta.
A little louder. I'm going to put my AirPods. So I'm on the UNLV campus now, and Jewish faculty is beginning to get together. We're very, very lucky on our campus. And so far, there's been some minor pro-Palestinian demonstrations, but nothing that's disrupted the various vigils for Israel. And there have been many. Our Hillel, our Israeli student, SSI student organizations have taken a wonderful lead, as has Jewish Nevada. But one thing that came up, and I'm doing a little bit of self-introspection here. Have you heard of the book Jews Don't Count? The book Jews Don't Count. And I just heard of it from another colleague, and it's on Amazon. And the point is that in the civil rights movement and social justice movement, Jews are worried about everybody else. The diversity, the multiplicity, you know where this is going. The multiplicity of diversities identified on college campuses. What about the Jew? You know, listening to Jackie Rosen this morning, Rabbi hosted her, listening to head of Homeland Security that said we're 2-point-something% of the US population, and we're about 60% of all religious anti-racist geared against a religion. So it's a form of, you know, I'm beginning to get all in examining myself. I'm so worried about everybody else that am I proud to stand up as a Jew? And I wondered if you would ever come across that dynamic in your research.
Well, it's more than research here. For 10 years, I was the JCRC director, Jewish Community Relations Committee in Los Angeles. So these kinds of relationships with African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans, with political elites, with church leaders, and with other institutions meant that the Jewish community was deeply embedded and engaged in causes that sought to reflect the interests of these communities and hopefully garnering their support for us. And the profound silence that some of us have been feeling over these last weeks is a part of the sort of disruptive moment, shall we say, that we are all feeling. The sense that there isn't a kind of shared engagement or shared commitment to what we are concerned about. And it is troubling. There will be, and no doubt, a kind of a self-assessment that is Jewish institutions, whether it's the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, or hosts of JCRCs and others, will have to take a look at how we position ourselves going forward in light of the sense of this isolation that you articulated, and that obviously this book certainly references. So yes, I think this is a very troubling outcome of what we are experiencing at the moment. I'm just curious from our rabbinic colleagues, the two rabbis who are on with us, whether they've had Christian clergy at any point, or for that matter, other clergy, reach out to them to sort of give support, or at least show some interest and concerns for Israel and the Jewish people.
My short answer is some, but not enough. You know, I think most people in my congregation know I have a special relationship with the Presbyterian minister. We do a podcast together. And this guy was Jewish in another life, I swear. He is more upset daily than I am. He writes me 3 times a day about what's going on in Israel. And we just had an anti-Semitic attack on the west side of town. I think a lot of people know about it already, where there was the graffiti at Fort Apache in Charleston. And the graffiti said, you know, death to the Jews, free Palestine. And so it just went around Instagram and social media, and everyone's upset. And now he's writing an article about it. And then there's another black minister, and he's reached out to me. But in terms of my main interfaith group, we are a little bit at odds because we don't know how to talk to each other about something like this. For the most part, it is a far left group. And as we know, without stereotyping, far left is very pro-Palestinian. And here I am, one of the lone Jewish members. So we're going to have an off-committee meeting very soon to try to develop a circle of trust. And that's amongst us. And we've known each other over 25 years, some of us. But it's a very difficult thing to talk about. But we should, and we need to. But there is a lot of crickets, you know. I read an article, you know, Jews feel abandoned by their liberal allies. And I think there's a lot of truth to that right now.
Rabbi Baden, I wondered if you had some thoughts on that.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. I'm relatively new in the community, and I have not met a lot of colleagues outside of the Jewish world, but I do have dear friends who are ministers in Chicago who immediately texted me and reached out, which was lovely. But one of the saddest things, and Rabbi Axelrod, this resonates a little bit with what you were just saying, is in my former community, I was part of what was called the Coalition of the Children of Abraham. It was a beautiful group. It still is, I hope, of Muslim, Catholic, and Jewish teenagers, and doing a lot of interfaith activities. And the priest, who was the founding lead member, actually posted on his Facebook page that he realizes that his posts cause hurt. Whatever he posts, it's causing hurt to somebody. And so he's going to just stay quiet. And on the one hand, I appreciate that. I really do, because I think a lot of well-intentioned people say things that are not fully, you know, not really considering all the implications. And so sometimes it's better just for well-intentioned people to just stay quiet if they don't know the full story. On the other hand, it's really sad that, as Rabbi Axelrod just said, we don't have the language to really talk about this. The other thing I'll just say is, picking up on Rabbi Axelrod's comment, is I have to remind people when they say, well, I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Palestinian too. I really am. And I'm also pro-Israel. And it's not about being anti-Palestinian, it's about being anti-terrorism. And there's a big difference between being pro-Palestine and defending Hamas's barbaric terrorism. And I wish that more people understood that nuance.
Thank you.
Very good points. So I have been also participating in Zoom classes put on by Tikva Fund. And tonight's lecture was on moral clarity during wartime, which is so apropos to this conversation right now. And last night's was about the Yom Kippur War, but somehow, I think it was last night, the speaker reflected on a study, a recent study, I don't know, Pew study, I think, on support for Israel, found that consistently, adult Jews or the older Jewish population of America is very still pro-Israel and supportive of Israel on this side of the war. But something that really disturbed me is that between the age group of 18 to 24-year-olds, there was only a 4-point difference. 52% of 18 to 24-year-olds support Israel in this effort that's going on right now, and 48% no, they support Hamas. And I'm thinking, that made me think of our discussion last week with you, Dr. Windmueller, about the follow-up to things like birthright efforts.
Right.
We're falling flat on our face. We give them a wonderful experience. They get a little taste of Jewish community and affiliation, and then it dissipates. They go to college and they hear all this other stuff that's happening. So I'm going to rewatch last week's video, and where you suggested some sources for some programming that we can try and carry on, at least here locally, because that's
we need a booster shot to birthright.
Sean, well, actually, can I actually raise a question about that? I fear a lot about what I call birthright backlash. I worked in Ann Arbor for a couple of years with young adults, and some actually said to me, why should I pay for membership? If you had enough money to send me and all my friends to Israel, don't tell me that you need my money to support Jewish community. And actually, sometimes there was almost a feeling like, where's my door prize for showing up? And I really worry, Dr. Windmueller, I wonder if you've touched on this when you're with your research about, I fear that we've created a culture of entitlement, which we already are experiencing in the broader society, but even more so, this expectation that you're going to get an iPad or you're going to get, a free trip to Israel or something else, so that when we say to young adults and older adults, this is what it costs to run a temple or a federation or a JCC, they're like, come on, right?
Yeah, exactly. The 18 to 35-year-old's perception of the entitlement to community, that is, they oppose or have great difficulty understanding the idea of membership, affiliation, and denominationalism, because they see those as sort of core ideas that go back to this question of loyalty, and they reject the sense that they have the responsibility to pick up their parents' or grandparents' connections and to support those. So this expectation of being part of the Jewish community without paying a price is profoundly a factor in why we see so many younger Jews sort of either non-affiliating or marginally participating. And that's become a major challenge. And certainly there are communities across the country which are trying to figure out ways to introduce membership and participation and philanthropy as ways of giving kids an exposure to the importance or the responsibility, if you wish, for being a member of community. The act of membership is more than simply a dues paying initiative. It involves a commitment that you believe in the Jewish people, you believe you're part of something larger than yourself, and therefore that is a price one pays or is expected to pay for affiliation and commitment.
Arlene Kaplan has a question.
I was just going to come back on what Rabbi Baden said about the feeling of entitlement from some of these younger people. And I've got to say that I don't think this is new. I think there's an aspect of this that goes back a long ways. I will never forget a young man almost 45 years ago in student housing that we had been maintaining. When I went in to collect his rent, he gave me cash. And so I was standing there writing a receipt for him. And as I'm writing the receipt, he says, "I suppose you're going to go shopping now with all that money." And I just looked at him and I said, "No, I'm going to go to the bank and bank it because I have taxes and I have a mortgage. And then I have to have money to restore this place after you leave before the new students come in." And he just looked at me totally dumbfounded. And I don't think this is necessarily religious based or in any way. I think it's a factor of what we are no longer presenting in our schools to help young people understand the economics of life and to be prepared for that. They get to college and there is that expectation of entitlement. They just don't know it any other way. So I think all along we've got to do something to help educate our young people when they are young and start from the beginning with them so that they are prepared for life and they don't have this expectation of entitlement.
I appreciate that, Arlene. I think there's a lot to that. The issues that are underserved in American public education are civics, and the other is core economics, the core principles of how a society works. And your comments reflect certainly the latter of these.
However, I agree with you. I did not go into that aspect of it, but that's true. It is kids on the street. The late night shows have a great entertainment source. They go out on the street with a microphone and say, what are the two of the four forms of government, houses of government we have? They don't know. They have no clue. How many senators, how many representatives, anything about government, they don't have a clue.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap it up. Keep to the time in respect of everybody's time. I personally would like to say thank you so much, Dr. Windmueller. I've learned a lot these last.
I'm most appreciative to the two congregations and to your two the rabbinic leaders for inviting me, and to you, Shana, for managing me so beautifully. And I would welcome the opportunity for us to revisit at some point in the future some of what we've just chatted about and take us to some new ground.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Rabbi Baden, you want to wrap it up? We enjoyed partnering with our sister congregation so much.
Thank you. And Rabbi Esther, I'm so glad to see you. And really, thank you so much for inviting us to co-sponsor this with you. And Dr. Windmueller, it is always good to learn from you. It's wonderful to read your articles and to learn from your observations, but it's even more of a treat to be able to hear it from you directly and to be able to interact with you. And thank you so much for your generosity of time and ideas with us.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
See everyone at services. The Hanukkah Bazaar at Near to Meet is on Sunday. That's a quick little plug. Rabbi Baden, I don't know when your Hanukkah Bazaar is. Do a plug.
It's coming up. It's coming up. But also, I just want to. I hopefully people saw the invitation.
Oh yeah.
To the Shloshim program that's happening Sunday night. You must register to receive the location. But I'm sure it's going to be a very moving and profound evening for our community to come together as we mark the Shloshim of the massacre of October 7th. So
A little fun and a little poignancy on Sunday. That'll be Sunday evening.
absolutely. And looking forward to more opportunities to collaborate and come together as a strong Reformed community here in Las Vegas. Thank you so much.
Sure.